Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Today, I am joined by Thea Berry, who is someone that I know and personally love, and I know that you're going to love her too. You know, we often say at the Abortion Survivors Network that abortion survival impacts more than just the baby who survives. And I know Thea is going to be able to talk to us about that really intimately today. So, Thea, I just want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Life Beyond Abortion.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I don't even know where to start, if I'm being honest. I was thinking about that in my head of we could start in so many different directions. I mean, I think where I want to start is what did you know about abortion survivors before you joined our team? You're our outreach coordinator. You are phenomenal at what you do. But I think that would be a question that people have is what did you know about abortion survivors before you joined the team? And then I think the question on the back end of that is like, what do you know now?
That's a very that's a loaded question, but it's a really good. So, I guess in order to answer that question, I'd have to share a little bit of my story and kind of how I got connected and whatnot. But so in 2018, our family had the incredible privilege to adopt our fourth child out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And I will say prior to March of 2018, I truthfully and honestly did not know that babies could survive abortions. I had I think I had distantly heard that because I knew who you were just through being involved in the pro-life world. But even so, I thought, oh, that's a rarity. That happens maybe one time out of every million babies or something to that extent. And so we were in the middle of our adoption journey and we got the call, got on a red eye flight and flew across the country from Georgia to Salt Lake City to adopt our son. And we were in the middle of that process. He was born very, very sick and was in the NICU for a while. And it was while we were in the hospital, kind of building a relationship with his birth parents, that we found out just through his birth mother admitting to us, like plainly in conversation, that he was an abortion survivor. And I won't lie to you, when that happened, I remember kind of glancing to the side at my husband, almost making a motion of like, don't react, don't react, don't react, because we don't want her to feel judged, right? We don't want her to feel in that moment that we were judging her for any choice that she has made in the past. And so she shared with us that she had attempted to abort him twice and was unsuccessful. And in that moment, I think the world kind of froze because it was just so much information coming at once that was just being talked about so casually. And there were a couple of medical professionals in the room and they were not saying anything. They were kind of just affirming like, yeah, this is what's in her chart. This is what she's told us. And so fast forward, he had a really crazy NICU journey, and it's a miracle that he survived everything that he went through. But I remember we got home, he was around 6 weeks old, and it was one of the first few nights that I was, doing the night shift of feeding him, and I was rocking him in his rocker. And I remember just holding him to my chest and honestly, tears streaming down my face, thinking, I feel so alone because I don't know any other adoptive parent. I don't know any other parent that has this situation. And from that point, that's when I got on Google. And so I essentially typed in, do babies survive abortion? Something to that extent. and then was connected to the Abortion Survivors Network through your website. And then I immediately got on Instagram. And that was kind of just the beginning of finding out, oh my gosh, there's more than just Milo. There's more than just Melissa, this person who started this organization. There's actually a lot of people that have been through this. And so that's the front end of the question. So the answer is no, I really didn't know anything until 2018 when we adopted our son. And
Can I
so,
ask you more about what you learned through Milo's birth mom? Because I think people have a lot of questions, even for adoptive parents and for biological mothers, and maybe even medical professionals who say, people will say, well, I mean, what were you told? What type of abortion was it? Do you know how far along she was? Didn't she know how far along she was? What kind of health issues was Milo facing that kept him in the NICU? Is it related to the abortion? What is his health like now? I mean, you know the drill. People have a lot of questions once they hear that little bit.
they do. And so for us, when we were told about it, again, we kind of paused in that moment. We let the birth mom share kind of what she was comfortable sharing. At that point, she was having some vitals taken. So they finished those vitals. And I wanted to wait until the nurses left the room because it just felt like, very intimate questions that I was about to follow up with. Right. And so at that point, I said, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does that mean that he survived an abortion? Did you go to a clinic? What happened? And so she proceeded to share that, she had found out about the pregnancy, did not want to carry him. And so she had gone online to an online abortion facility that essentially provided the abortion pill via mail, right? So she did a telehealth appointment with a doctor and essentially was in her first trimester, but towards the end of her first trimester. And so the pill was sent. She took both sets of the pills because there's two pills that need to be taken, or two sets, I guess, that need to be taken, and then figured that everything was done and she was good. And then it was probably a month or two later, she said that she felt kicks, right? She felt movement within her body. And so she went to a drugstore, got another pregnancy test, and sure enough, she said that it turned positive before she even finished using the bathroom, right? So she was very much so still pregnant. And so in a panic, she essentially went back to that same online clinic and spoke to, I guess, some medical professionals. I'm not sure exactly who, but they essentially sent her another set of pills, which is shocking and disturbing on many levels. And I think it points a lot to the main motives of the abortion industry, right? They they like to profit off of people that are in vulnerable situations. And so I think you and I both know that no ethical and moral medical professional would provide abortion pills to somebody who at that point was almost in her third trimester. She was at the very end of her second trimester going into the third.
And this
And
is
we
one
know
of
that
those situations where, going through it at the time for you, I mean, I can only imagine, and I know enough about you all to know that you are people of great faith and courage, but at the same time, hearing those things, whether or not you had kind of this acumen, which you didn't at the time, right? That's something that's come along when you joined our team. And
yep.
I would have hired you whether you were Milo's mom or not, because you have a great skill set, if people are wondering that. But I just want people to kind of put themselves in your shoes to think, man, this is an ordinary family who, right, knew that they were called to adopt. And they
Yep.
hear this information about this vulnerable baby.
Yep.
And so many people in our world don't understand that chemical abortions fail. And that point that you're talking about is so important that, right, she was kind of later in that first trimester. And then she's given, which is when effectiveness starts to go down more rapidly. And then she takes another set, being told that that's the solution to her problem, not knowing how far along she is. So the longer, right, gestationally she is, the greater the likelihood is that it's going to fail or cause some sort of complication. And I was
Yep.
just reading through a piece of legislation being introduced in Tennessee where they were sort of decrying the fact that pregnancy center directors were giving testimony about women just like Milo's birth mom who are experiencing complications. And right, the abortion industry is like so irritated trying to say that these directors are lying. And it's like, man, no, the truth is hiding in plain sight. Women are
Yep.
starting to talk about it. They come to us. Adoptive families know it. Pregnancy centers know it. Like, you guys have
Yep.
lived with the truth.
Yes, yes. And that was honestly, I mean, I've always been devoutly pro-life. It's something that has just been deeply like part of my faith journey for my entire faith journey. But in the moment of finding out that Milo survived something like this, it instantly gave humanity to the fact that the unborn are murdered right through the act of abortion. Again, just I can't even tell you the number of times, even now, he's 7 years old, that I will look at him or hold him or rock him and as he was a baby and his humanity. It's so incredibly deeply rooted into me that he is a person with a soul that had value. The same value that he has now was inherent when he was in the womb, right? And so, yeah, it is such a heavy, heavy thing. Like you said, to be a normal family and, answering the call to adopt and knowing that you're following God's plan. And then we already knew just based on a few other factors from, his birth mom's like health questionnaire that there were going to be some health issues in the future. But to have this added on top of everything was, again, it just felt like a massive bomb went off. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it than to just an immense weight as parents to say, oh my goodness, one day, and it's not going to be now, it won't be tomorrow, but one day I'm going to have to sit down and I'm going to have to tell him this. And the added dynamic that our adoption is an open adoption. So we are super blessed to have a relationship with both of his birth parents, both birth mom and birth father. And I'm going to have to tell him that. And again, even to this day, I can't thank God enough for exposing one, the truth and the humanity of abortion to me, but then being connected to the ASN and learning that Milo's not alone. We're not alone. Yeah, sorry, it's such a heavy thing. I hope I'm answering okay.
That's the beauty of it all. We all have a story. And I think sometimes in some ways our world tries to oversimplify things like abortion, right? Like you can just take a pill, it's like Tylenol, you can go on with your life. And the people who are actually impacted by it are like, no, 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 no. I've
Mhm.
lived a different experience. So we it's oversimplified in some ways. And yet, right, life is also like just more complicated, but it's not complicated is not a bad thing. It just simply is what it is. And I think that's the beauty of what you guys epitomize as a family. And I can only hope that, my family, my adoptive parents, my biological mom, me raising our daughters, all those things, I like to think that we're doing pretty well with what we've been given. We don't know everything, but we're writing the playbook as we're living it and trying to pass it along to other people so they have hope and encouragement. So I guess that would be, my question for you is what gives you hope for Milo? What gives you encouragement for your family? What do you want Milo's birth mom and birth father to know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It's really simple, like you said, about simplifying things, but something that has just always stuck with me since we came home from the NICU with him is just the simple stated fact that he lived, right? In spite of everything that he endured while in utero, coming out of utero. He actually has an anoxic brain injury from coding twice in the OR when he was born via emergency C-section. So he has just overcome so much. He was septic when he was born, collapsed lungs, enlarged heart. The list was just a mile long. And so something that I cling to and something that encourages me is that he lived. And I know that that is so simple, but I remind myself that with every IEP meeting. I remind myself that with every doctor's appointment, with every hurdle that we face with him, and every hurdle that I face in my own personal life. I know you know this about me, but I actually lost my mom back in 2015. So that was 3 years before Milo was even a thought. And so she died very, very quickly from a sudden cancer diagnosis. And that really shattered a piece of me, right? That is unexplainable. And to this day remains to be something that I still grieve. And I literally, when Milo lived, it restored a part of me because at that point, up until he was born, after the death of my mom, I would get really angry with God and I'd have a lot of conversations with him, probably with a fist shaken at him of like, miracles don't happen, right? And if they do, you're just really lucky, right? And so for Milo to live was ultimately a gift of God to me, obviously to him and to our family. But the simple fact that he lived is what I've told his birth parents when they deal with the shame and the struggle, and they still deal with that. And we do a lot of, mainly myself and his birth mom, we have a really good relationship where we're able to talk and text. And I remind her, Mama S, he lived, right? At the end of the day, regardless of any decisions that were made, he lived. And I think that that's so simple, but it's also a really big, big thing that he lived.
That's amazing and beautiful. And, I guess that leads me to a question. I mean, obviously, people probably can start to connect the dots. You have a background in social work and adoption. That's part of what brought you to our team. And that's the beautiful thing. You started working with survivors, but you also work with moms and adoptive families and just the general public, people who have a lot of questions. And, I guess I'm curious to hear what you would have to say to fellow adoptive parents who, you know, maybe two parts. So maybe they literally just found out that the child they're adopting is an abortion survivor. What would you say to them in that moment? And then what would you say maybe to adoptive parents who, right, kiddo is like a teenager and they're still wrestling the question that you had, which is someday I'm going to have to tell my child their story. How am I going to do this? Why am I going to do this?
Yeah, I mean, for us, one of the things that I just, again, in my history with social work, something I'm a big proponent of is open adoption, if at all possible, right? I think boundaries are really important. There's lots of different ways to make open adoption a possibility in any adoption situation, depending on the circumstances. And so for us, something that my husband and I felt really strongly about, just based on my years of working with expectant moms, birth mothers, birth parents, was to keep that door open, right? Because ultimately we know that one day Milo will have questions about his adoption, about his survival. And what better way for those questions to get answered, not just through Jeremy and I, my husband, but through his birth parents, the actual source, right? And I think there are, I know that there are multiple studies that talk about the benefit of open adoption with adoptees, right? Identity crises and all the things that come along, which I know that you are familiar with as an adoptee yourself. And so what I would tell an adoptive parent is if there's any way that it's feasible to keep some sort of openness in that relationship, because ultimately when the questions come, and they will, I think that having an open line of communication is the healthiest and probably the safest way to go about um, facing those challenges head on, right? And that's something that we talk about with Milo's birth parents when the time comes. And we are, we're doing age appropriate truth right now. So he's 7. So what he knows now will be very different than when he's 15 or 16. But we always say we're in this together. And his birth parents, who are still openly and actively in addiction, are still a part of our lives. And we are still in it together with them because they too see the importance of being able to communicate maybe why they made the choices they made, and being able to communicate sometimes what some survivors never get is that I'm sorry, right? I didn't know then, but I know now, and I'm sorry. And I think that is probably what I would say on both ends. I mean, it's a little different when your child is significantly older, but the other part that I would encourage is there are resources, right? There's the ASN. There are many, many survivors and adoptive families and adoptees, so many people that are there for support. And I think that again, I think that's the richest wealth that we have within the ASN is solely to be able to show survivors it's not just you. And that's a really big, I know you know that, but the number of survivors that I talk to from young ages in their early 20s all the way up into their 80s, for them to hear that they're not alone, it changes everything.
And I know you and I always have this beautiful opportunity to read an email and go, "Oh my gosh, this this story is so beautiful."
Yeah.
So, is there, like, keeping things anonymous, but is there one particular email or, connection you've made with a survivor that just sticks out more than anything to you?
Wow. There's so many. Gosh, it's hard to choose just one, but I think one of the more recent ones that you and I talked about was I believe it was a mom who was pregnant and did not want to carry further. And so she thought she had had the abortion done, and then it was actually the shape of her uterus. Do you remember that? That prevented. Yes, and so she had the procedure done, and the heart-shaped uterus was actually what protected her child from, ultimately surviving the abortion attempt. And I know that may not be the exact answer that you were looking for, but that stuck with me. That was just it's so incredibly powerful to see even how the human body resists abortion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, every survival story is so unique. And I know that's one of those things you've learned working at the Abortion Survivors Network is whoa, right? Like, I've learned about Milo's experience, and that's one way abortion survival happens. But every single day, there's a different story. And it is both surprising yet beautiful in the midst of the pain of it all.
Yeah, and like you said, the difference is it is and it's hard, right? It's hard to wrestle with, but to hear stories like that, to hear stories like Milo, the chemical abortion pill, but then when you go back to pre-Roe, right, hearing the stories and talking with survivors and counseling with them and hearing that they survived clothes hanger attempts, right? And I think that too is so mind-boggling, even for me being a millennial, right? Like you hear about these things, and sometimes you maybe even think it's propaganda that, again, maybe one person has tried that and it doesn't happen. But then to speak to someone in their 80s who has survived an abortion attempt that was attempted by a clothes hanger that probably wasn't sterile, to be honest, right? And so to hear how that affects them, and they're 80 years old and they've lived beautiful, long lives. Again, just the dynamics of how different every situation is, but ultimately, the humanity in every single person, and every single person that's in the womb, that will be in the womb, that has been in the womb, has the right to life. We just do.
Yeah, the other night I was in an Uber and I don't even know how it came about. We were talking about family, and my driver was talking about age range of kids, right? Kids in 20s down to like an infant right now. And so then he was, talking about just the differences in children. And then he shared about his mom. And he said, "Yeah, I'm from Jamaica, and my mom got pregnant at 17. And she's told me the story how she used to throw herself out of a tree in an attempt to induce an abortion with me." And he
Mm.
felt so awkward, and you could tell, right, shameful saying it.
Mhm.
And so I just paused for a minute and I said, huh. I said, "Just so you're aware, I can relate to your story." And his head sort of snaps back. And I just barely told him a little bit about my experience. And he went, whoa.
Wow.
And I think that's the beauty of what you do both personally and professionally is you're breaking down these barriers, not only for Milo and his birth parents and your family, but for other families as well, to say, hey, you are not alone in this. You don't need to feel ashamed about this. There's grace in the midst of this. There's answers, there's hope, and there's a place you can go called the Abortion Survivors Network. We serve anybody who's been impacted by an abortion
Yeah.
that didn't go the way it was planned to.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, it's powerful, right? The human connection stories. Ultimately, I believe that's the most powerful weapon that we carry with us is our story. And stories have the power to change the world, as you know. And so, yeah, I'm just so thankful for you, Melissa, for the work you've done, for the work that I get to do. It's the best job I've ever had.
Or
I love
my
it.
ride or die. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is, what day of the week. You and I together, we can tackle just about
Yeah.
anything. Knock on wood. There's always something.
Yes, yes, but it's fun and I love it. And like I said, the human connection piece of it is life-giving. It's so life-giving. I'm in love with the work that the ASN does. It's truly kingdom work on many levels.
Thank you. You know, if people want to follow more of Milo's story, I know that we've put it out in a couple of places, but where can they learn more about Milo? How can they get in touch with you if they have questions about adoption and abortion survivors?
I mean, definitely you can email me for sure, Thea at abortionsurvivors.org. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. Those are private, but you can send a request or a message and we can definitely converse through there either way. But yeah, I love to share. It's a blessing to share.
Well, thank you for joining me today. And like I said, for everything that you do day in and day out, we would not be the Abortion Survivors Network without you, Thea.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate you.
So, thank you for joining us today for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. As Thea shared, if you want to know more about her story, you can reach out Thea at abortionsurvivors.org. You can follow her on social media. She runs a great curated social media feed, if I'm being honest, and keeps up on my social media alerts better than I do. But for more information about abortion survivors and maybe to find out how to connect with our online groups and maybe even one-on-one connection with our two social workers, Thea and Kira, you can reach out to us at the Abortion Survivors Network. That is abortionsurvivors.org, or send Thea a message at Thea at abortionsurvivors.org. Thank you again, Thea, for joining me. And thank you to all of you for listening in to this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. Don't forget to like it, to share it with other people, wherever you like to receive your podcasts from, and for helping us to share the important truth that there is so much more to life beyond abortion, as Thea just shared with you today. Thanks so much, Thea.
Thanks.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaoden.com or by following her on Instagram at melissaoden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.